The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acomb. We're broadcasting from the Hesselson's studio. Thank you so much to our guests for being in the studio this morning.
I'm happy to be here, Frank. Good to join you.
Well, we've got a lot of questions. We talk about the news, of course, every day on the program. So as we look at the new presidential administration under Donald Trump, what are some of the key economic policies you expect to take center stage? Can you guess that?
Yeah. Well, I think, if you're paying attention sort of pre-election and even through now, Trump's message has been pretty consistent, whether you agree with it or not. I think there's some big themes developing out of this, really kind of in three areas, right? He's talked about tariffs, he's talked about reduction of income taxes, and he's talked about sort of economic stimulus in a number of different ways. The question is if and when that really kind of comes down to the everyday person in this country. But it has been somewhat consistent. Some of the things that we kind of have been looking at from the very beginning is right down to the individual level, because that's who we're dealing with, right, as advisors, right? How does this impact us? One of the things that we focused in on was Trump had put in place some tax rules, laws, in his first administration that are set to expire at the end of this year.
Okay.
And now with that he is in office, the expectation is that those will get extended. And there's a few things in there that are pretty important, small businesses and to individuals. Just to highlight a couple of the things. Small businesses, you're looking at a qualified business income deduction, you're looking at bonus depreciation, and we would expect those to get extended, and those are very supportive to small businesses. Tax rates are set to go higher, if not extended. We would expect the current tax rates to get extended. The estate tax exemption, federal estate tax exemption, sits at about $13 million, a huge dollar amount, which basically eliminates a lot of estates from taxation, and we would expect that to get extended as well. There's so a lot of that can be very stimulative, right down to the individual level.
Okay.
There is a few things in there that would that he put in place that were actually not tax reductions, but kind of turned out to be increase in taxes overall. And one of them in particular that's being talked about as being eliminated is what's called the SALT deduction, SALT. So that's your state and local income taxes. Right. What they were trying to do was simplify the income tax return for the individual by increasing the standard deduction, right? And that knocked a lot of people out of itemizing deductions at the federal level. But then what we found out was that at the state level, you still had to do that accounting. So it didn't really simplify anything in some ways. Now we have this $10,000 cap on the amount of taxes we can deduct on our federal tax return if we're in itemized deductions, and there is talk about eliminating that. So that would be another positive potentially. But I guess overall, it sounds as though we're trying to generate economic activity, and there are good and bad outcomes to that, right? Everyone wants, a growing economy and more money in their pockets and things like that. But what we have to really kind of be careful of is what is the ultimate outcome, because we have kind of seen that in the past where an overstimulated economy can actually be a negative in some ways.
Well, that is interesting. This is a unique position because you can also study what the 4 years look like under Trump. This is unique. We've never seen anything quite like that. But when you've done historically, when you look at presidential administrations, it doesn't matter the party, how has it impacted the economy and markets in the short and then the long term?
Well, that's a great question because it was one that I kind of asked myself as we were leading up to this election, which was how has the stock market performed under different presidential elections? What I found was Deutsche Bank actually studied this in detail. Two research analysts went all the way back to 1901. They used the S&P 500 as their benchmark to study stock market performance. And there were three presidents, and only three, that had negative stock market performance. It was Hoover, Nixon, and then George W. Bush was the most recent. Now, if we just take that, because most of the viewers are going to remember the Bush presidency, which was 8 years, and there were two major market events that contributed to negative stock market performance. One was known as the dot-com bubble at the turn of the century, and one was known as the Great Recession from around the end of 2007 to the end of 2009. So one could say that the president really doesn't impact market performance, and it's more event-driven. But on the other hand, again, I like to debate with myself and say that there are certain things that a president or an administration can do that can push a market event in a positive or negative way.
Now, if you look at the past 4 years under the Biden administration as compared to the Trump years coming forward, what are you looking at in those two differences in kind of economic policies?
Well, It's a very interesting period of time to study, actually, because we've had some extreme volatility in a number of different areas, right? And I would go back to 2020 and start with the COVID era pandemic.
Sure.
And what I want viewers to kind of envision, and you, Frank, to envision real quick, is imagine I'm holding a bucket of water and I shake it profusely, right? The water's going to splash around and spill out, right? That's what essentially hit the economy, was a massive amount of shakeup and volatility because we shut down the economy due to a pandemic. And we had to stimulate it, though, right, to kind of keep it up and running. And how do we do that? Well, we put a lot of money in people's pockets. They needed money. They weren't working. We reduced rates to very, very low levels, which allowed, especially in our economy where it's sort of like this borrow and spend economy, to borrow capital at a very low rate and then go out and spend it. That stimulates an economy. And what we saw coming out of that in 2022 was massive amounts of inflation coming, right? Because now the economy's opened back up, people are back to work. Now they're not only spending stimulus dollars, essential stimulus dollars, as well as their own money now that they're earning again. So it's a lot of money chasing the same amount of goods and services, right? The Federal Reserve had to step in and act, and how do they do that? Well, they raise rates to kind of slow the economy back down. And then we turn the corner and the economy's starting to slow down, and now they start lowering rates again. And now we're kind of at this pause moment. So take that bucket of water, 2020, 2021, I shake it up and water spilling everywhere. And then we get to say 23 and 24, we set the bucket down and the water's trying to find equilibrium. So again, is it really about presidential policy? Yeah, I mean, there's certainly some impact, but we're still feeling the effects coming out of the pandemic era and looking for some equilibrium, if you will.
Interesting. So you've seen market volatility around past presidential transitions. What trends should people look for with the Trump transition?
Well, I think volatility is created by unknowns and big, bold statements. And we're certainly seeing that right now, right? Coming into the election, there was certainly a lot of unknown as to who was going to be our next president. And so we saw a lot of volatility. And actually, if you study the market the days following the election, we actually had some nice market upticks, And that was because we knew who the president was. It wasn't saying it was because Trump was going to be good or bad for the market, right? It just was. We knew who he was. And like you said, I mean, we had already seen his presidency before. Now we're getting into this position where there's these big, bold statements coming out of the federal government, and we're now seeing more volatility again. If we just rewind a couple of weeks when Trump announced the first set of tariffs on Mexico,
it's only been a couple of weeks.
It's been only a couple of weeks. It feels like it's been months, right? He announced these tariffs over the weekend, and markets gapped down on Monday. So, and then we've since recovered. And so there will be another set of announcements. And until we kind of find this like level playing ground of, okay, we're putting things in place and we're going to watch and see kind of the outcome of these things, I do expect a lot of volatility kind of in the early stages here.
Well, how much of the market's reaction to the Trump administration is based on maybe policy versus investor sentiment and speculation?
I would say a lot of it right now is emotional, just opinion. And there is a lot going on. We have a new administration. We have a Federal Reserve that is kind of at a pause right now in terms of their policy of raising rates or lowering rates. We also right now we're sitting in a period of 2 weeks where there are a lot of earnings announcements coming from companies. So we've just got this bucket of stuff that we're trying to sift through, and it is going to create a lot of volatility just on its own, right? But we're in a very emotional stage right now. I would say, more so than any other administration change I've ever seen. I don't know how you feel about that, but it feels like there's a lot of, there's a big divide between the two sides. And so I think we're not at the fundamental stage of what the policy outcomes and economic impact will be. It's very emotional still right now.
And that's very interesting you say that, because you point to the weekend announcements. There's so many news stories every single day. Now we don't even have weekends off.
That's right.
It makes the show very easy, let me tell you. So what potential shifts in tax policy, deregulation, and spending, what do you think investors should consider in their portfolios?
Well, like I said, we're dealing down at the very personal level. We're not political,
right?
And we don't know what the actual impact is going to be of these things, because, like I said, we saw tariffs implemented and then we saw tariffs paused, right? So we have to deal with kind of what we have in front of us. So it's really a good question. It makes me reflect on a recent article I was reading where the title was, "We wish we had listened to our advisor." And of course, it's going to pique my interest being an advisor, right? Is you have clients who we have great relationships with our clients and very strong partnerships. So there is a lot of give and take. But this particular couple in this article was explaining how their advisor had recommended that they take this pile of cash that they had developed and not pay off their mortgage and invest the money instead to enhance their retirement savings and so on. And they did not follow that advice. They actually paid off their mortgage. Now, depending on what side you sit on, right? There's pundits, experts, and so on that feel, eliminate all debt as soon as you can, and there's some that say use good debt to enhance savings and investments, right? I actually paid attention probably to a part of the article that I wasn't really supposed to. It was, what did they do with the extra money on a monthly basis? They paid off their mortgage. And they talked about how they enhanced their life out of it. They went to more expensive restaurants, and they bought more things. Okay, so this is where the part of what's kind of coming out that I get concerned with, right, is because I think in this country you hear, there's roughly $1 trillion in credit card debt sitting out there. The last administration was trying to help student loan borrowers, right, by providing some relief. It's what does the individual actually do with that extra money if there's policies put in place that lower taxes or have them find extra cash flow.
Right.
My concern is that it's not used in a disciplined way, and this is just my brain as an advisor, right? Is that it's used to enhance lifestyle instead of enhance future lifestyle. It's enhancing now versus future, right? Where if the everyday individual using that extra cash flow to enhance their retirement savings, pay off debt, and especially debt that is not good debt, right? And using it to enhance what could their goals and objectives in their financial plan, there's nothing really in place to help us do that. So it's a concern. I mean, it seems like a good opportunity, but it is a concern. Is do we have this opportunity to really kind of improve our own personal financial status?
Do you see a big uptick in phone calls when there's a new president asking you questions?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there always kind of a concern around it?
There's a lot of there's concern, and then there is also what can we do to capture, right? So there's two sides. What I would suggest to people, and I've had clients call and say I'm very, very concerned about what this president's going to do, and it's not just with Trump; it's been past presidents too. It's listen. If there is a high level of concern, the first thing you should do is review whatever the plan is, okay, and make a change, because you're not going to sleep at night until you kind of take a step, take an action, okay. My job as the advisor is to make sure you don't go too overboard, right? Is like kind of bring balance to the conversation, regardless of which side you sit on. But if you do have this fear that there's a severe market correction coming because of a president, it might be because you're too overextended in risk anyway. And so you should really think about, go back and revisit some of the things that are very, very personal and individual to you, right? You need to revisit diversification, not just in your investments, but your overall plan. Diversification applies to more than just your investment portfolio. Right. You should revisit your balance, and that is also not just to your investment portfolio, that's your overall plan, not going too far down one strategy to where it's going to cost you a lot to back out of it. And what is your overall timeline, right? So people who are nervous about where their money is invested, maybe they're too far invested into one strategy or one area, and they need to find balance. They need to find diversification. But also the timeline's important, right? If you've invested cash that you think you're going to need in the next 2 or 3 years, you're probably overextended in your investments, and we would say you need to start looking at sort of more conservative vehicles for something like that.
How might Trump's fiscal policies, such as the tax cuts that we talked about, infrastructure spending, tariffs, those type of things, how do they affect the overall economic growth?
Well, it depends on how it's used, right? Because what is being talked about in reduction of spending and tariffs that are supposed to be beneficial to our country, or lower taxes, it really depends on what it's used for.
Sure.
If those things are used to benefit our country, to improve our infrastructure, which is sorely needed, roads, bridges, highways, the power grid, things like that, then we're going to start to see improvements in our country and overall economy, because those investments are going back into our country. What you can't have, and what I would say is you can't have a continuation of what we've seen in this country. It's something that's concerned us overall long term, is we're continuing to run a budget deficit. We are continuing to add to our nation's debt. And while I don't believe that all debt is bad debt. There is a point where we've got to fix something, right? Because someone's got to pay that back. And we talk about every president for a long, long time has said, here, we have to make improvements to our financial status in our country. And it could be our nation's debt, it could be our budget, it could be even programs like Social Security and Medicare. And our thought and belief was that those were going to be very, very hard decisions to make, right? Like, how are you going to do that? Well, you either raise revenue or cut costs. And we're kind of seeing some of that on one side right now through a lot of cost cutting. But as long as it's put back into improvement of the overall country, what we should see are programs getting healthier, like Social Security and Medicare. We should see more opportunities for small business owners and entrepreneurs to build things, right? We should see opportunities for just everyday Americans to improve their own financial status, not mirror it after how the country's been run, but improve ourselves and pay off our own bad debt and invest in our future and our kids' future and so on.
We'd be in some big trouble if we spent like What impact do you foresee on inflation and interest rates under the Trump administration?
Those are two big words, right?
Yeah,
that we've talked about for a long, long time, and they're inextricably linked, I think. But for the viewers, maybe a little education would help, right? Why are these two things linked? Well, not all inflation's bad inflation, right? I mean, we need some, and what that is a signal of is a growing economy when there's some inflation. Too much inflation, like I said, coming through 2022, overstimulation, that causes prices to get out of control, and we as consumers just can't afford. Our wages won't keep up. To be able to buy the things we need to buy. On the other hand, interest rates are used as a control. It makes when rates are higher, it makes cost of capital more expensive, right? So think about it as someone who wants to go buy a home. There is gridlock in the real estate market right now. Why is that? Well, because during the COVID era, rates were reduced to low levels that you and I will probably never see.
I know,
right?
I missed that opportunity.
And if you didn't buy a home or you didn't refinance your home, you're probably thinking I missed an opportunity. But if you did, think about now. People with 3% on average mortgage rates, they're not necessarily wanting to sell a home because most people who are looking to sell a home, they're probably looking to upgrade, right?
Right.
So they look to upgrade, and that's going to cost more money. But it's also going to cost more money because rates are higher, right?
Right.
So they're not willing to sell because it's going to cost them double, right? There's two catalysts there for it to cost more. You have first-time home buyers who are looking at mortgage rates saying, I can't afford that right now, or I can't afford the home I want or whatnot. So there is some gridlock in some areas, and if interest rates are lowered, more people are thinking, well, I can afford a house now. Well, home ownership has been a big focus across a lot of administrations because think of the ripple effect that causes through the economy. Of course. I go buy a new home, I'm going to buy new appliances, I'm going to buy new furniture, I'm going to buy new things, right? So there is this ripple effect that goes beyond just buying a home. So if interest rates are higher, it creates gridlock, cost of capital is more. Of course. If interest rates are lowered, there's more money. It's cheaper money. And it's chasing the same amount of goods. Okay. So think about it as a person who might want to buy a home. I'm sitting back waiting for mortgage rates to drop. Right. So isn't everybody else.
Yeah, right.
And those homes that I was looking at currently, they're only going to get more valuable, and so I'm going to have to spend up even more than I would now. So that is sort of in a microcosm, like that's the impact of inflation and interest rates. And what has come out of this administration is they think interest rates are too high in a lot of ways. In some ways, I think maybe they're not high enough. Like one thing I heard recently is wanting to cap credit card interest rates. Yeah. I'm a little counterintuitive in this. Is like credit cards as an advisors, we're looking to eliminate the use of credit card debt. From a debt standpoint and spending standpoint, I want to see credit card rates higher. I want to deter people from using credit cards and force people to look at ways to create a cash flow positive and use that instead of using credit cards as an extension of income, so to speak. So that's how these two things work, right? Lower interest rates, more money flowing, causes inflation. We got to raise rates, shut that down, and so on. And right now, it seems to be that we want to lower rates, and I think it can be good in some areas. It might remove some of the gridlock in real estate, but it can cause there's a cause and effect to everything.
For everything. What lessons can investors take from past presidential transitions when it comes to their long-term financial planning?
One, don't take lessons from the federal government.
Yes, that's always our number one here.
Because if Frank, if you and I ran a company like the federal government runs, we'd be fired in a minute.
Oh, right? There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt.
And so I would say don't take lessons from the federal government, but look to be more disciplined in your approach.
Sure.
Bring in some of the core characteristics of just good financial operation, like good financial health. I mentioned some already, right, is diversification. It doesn't just apply to investments.
Right.
We talk about tax diversification, right? We talk about diversifying plans. We talk about balance a lot, right? And the reason we talk about those things is because outcomes can be influenced by things out of our control. If we get too far down one path and something changes that negatively impacts that path, if it costs us a lot to switch gears, that could impact our overall financial future, right?
I got a couple more questions I want to ask you, but everybody's getting loud upstairs. You hear they're so excited about this interview. So let me take a short break and yell at them, okay?
Okay.
We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. Stay with us. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. We return to our interview now. So should investors be making adjustments now, or is it better to take a wait and see approach as the administration is only a month old?
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of making adjustments based on prediction, right? And sort of that's the stage I think we're at right now. If we make major shifts, we're just predicting what we think the outcomes are. Right. It's not necessarily a wait and see though either, right? There's got to have some balance. So it's a revisit what's in front of us. What can we take advantage of right now? What can we optimize for ourselves within our own plan? And again, bring back a lot of those fundamentals. This is about diversification, balance. This is about your time horizon. What are you trying to achieve? And the discipline in approaching it in that fashion, not necessarily reacting to every news story, because like we said earlier, right? I mean, the news cycle is 24/7, and we'll go nuts over that, right? So we just have to focus on what our ultimate goals and objectives are and optimize based on what we know now. Yeah. That it means we have to create a positive cash flow situation in our weekly budget, whatever that is, right? And that means that when we do that, we can pay off debt if we've accumulated. Not all debt is bad debt, right? So learn what that really means. Mortgages are pretty good debt to have. I could even vouch for a 0% car loan, right? Okay. But get rid of the bad debt. Right. Get to a point where we're saving for our future, because we don't know what the future holds. And if you're really fearful of what an administration or some, what Congress might do or the president might do, the best way to insulate yourself is to not be reliant on what they're going to give you, but relying on, this is what I built for myself. And so that's the best thing we can do, is just kind of come back to those fundamental basics of just proper financial health.
And that's a good lesson in general. It doesn't have to do with who's the president, who's not. Just take absolutely. Looking beyond this administration, what long-term economic trends should investors be watching, regardless of whoever's in office?
I think, depending on your timeline, the things I would be paying attention to in terms of how to direct and guide our own personal financial plans is what happens with tax laws overall, and be ready to pounce on opportunities. Sure. I heard recently, Trump wants to eliminate the capital gains tax. That would suggest that people need to hurry up and take a lot of capital gains. That's not necessarily the best thing to do, right? Because if you're in a good, solid, long-term investment plan, it's not about churning your investments, right? So it does mean that we have to apply the opportunities that we have, though, to our own financial plan. One thing I like to talk to clients about is this concept of tax diversification, because we know what taxes are right now. Right. And we've taken some steps over the last few years, knowing that we have some tax provisions that are expiring, and what can we take advantage of now in case they are not extended, and we think they are going to be. But it's looking at, what can I set myself up for that's being taxed now, because the tax rates on taxable monies now aren't horrible in some ways. Right. What can I do to not pay tax until later on a certain amount of my investments? And then what can I set up so that I never pay tax again? And that's using like Roth IRAs and so on. And capitalize on making on a lot of opportunities, but optimizing our overall tax situation. And this is just a small piece of an overall financial plan, is take what you have in front of you now, which is a pretty good tax regime. Yes, we can plan on the fact that is going to be extended, but it doesn't mean wait, right? It means take some measured opportunities now.
Just before we go on, thank you for this. This was really informative. Where can people find out more if they have questions for you?
You can find us on all social networks, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and so on. We also have a very, very informative and robust website, jgua.com, which has a lot of links to blogs, articles. We have a couple of podcasts out there. If we have people that listen to podcasts, there's a lot of ways that you can find us, and you can always pick up the telephone and call. And
the old-fashioned way.
The old-fashioned way.
Well, thanks so much for giving us so much time this morning and helping people out.
Frank, it's been a real pleasure.
All right, we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. Stay with us.